yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Angelina Molino, if you could go next, please.
I'm Angelo Molino. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Toronto. I was born and raised in Toronto, so I'm a fairly rare creature, not only in the economics department, but in the city as a whole. My interests are in macroeconomics, particularly central banking, econometrics, and asset pricing.
Thank you so much, Professor. And lastly, but not least, Hamad, if you could go, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm a PhD candidate in my 6th year in economics at University of Toronto. My background is in public and education economics. I'm a TA at UTM at St. George. So many of you, I've seen many of you at UTM in the TA courses, and I'm looking forward to hearing about your proposals on how to get out of the current situation.
Thank you so much, all of you. So on behalf of the UAC, thank you so much to our judges for making the time to be here today. We're confident our students are looking forward to interacting with you. Now, without much further ado, we will begin our first presentation of the day. I hand it over to Riddhi.
Hey everyone, I'm Riddhi. Thank you so much, Sambit. I'm really excited to be hosting along with Sambit one of our most coveted events of the year. I'm also really excited to be testing out this YouTuber lifestyle and seeing if it's for me, as most of you have this lockdown. But yes, without much further ado, let's move on to the absolute highlight of the closing ceremony. We're going to move on to the first presentation of our day, which is Team 3, comprised of Nancy Chen, Angela Wen, and Ginny Chan. To all the teams, you'll be given 15 minutes and no longer, so please be cognizant of the time, no pressure. So Team 3, I believe the floor is yours. We're going to hand over screen sharing privileges.
Yes, Nancy has been made the co-host, so she'd be able to share her screen.
Okay, awesome. Team 3, the floor is yours. Good luck.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly and we can see your screen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm ready to start when you are. Perfect. Can everyone see the screen? Sorry.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, amazing.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Ginny. I'll be presenting today with my partners Nancy and Angela, and our chosen countries are Brazil and the UK. So I'll begin with a little bit about our team. We are all business students, and we actually recently studied abroad together in the UK, which is what inspired us to choose the UK as one of our countries. And so here's a photo that we took together in front of Buckingham Palace. So we'll begin by looking at Brazil's economic policies and the impact that they had. We'll follow a similar structure with the UK, and then we'll finish our presentation off by discussing some shifts in consumer spending, our future projections, and then which country we think better mitigated the economic fallout. So moving forward with the analysis part of our presentation, Brazil's GDP is 1.84 trillion, and they currently rank 6th largest in the world when it comes to population size. So as of March 2021, there are 11.7 million confirmed COVID cases with a mortality rate of 2.44%. Now here we prepared a COVID timeline of some important highlights throughout the year. The first case of COVID was confirmed in February of last year. The government was quick in providing financial assistance, but there were notable leadership issues throughout the year. In January of this year, Brazil exceeded 200,000 deaths, and the Lowy Institute cited their response to COVID as the worst in the world. So the pandemic actually reached Brazil later than most countries, but it quickly became the most affected in Latin America for several reasons. So the first one was wealth inequality. Although Brazil has the 9th largest GDP, over 25% of its population actually lives under the poverty line, making it one of the most unequal countries in the world. And this inequality was further intensified with the effects of COVID. So this included a lack of access to healthcare, health insurance, and the distribution of information about COVID and social distancing. So something else that we noticed was the leadership crisis. We saw many disagreements within the government in their handling of COVID. Just this week, actually, the president, Bolsonaro, hired his fourth health minister after the previous ministers resigned over disagreements about how to handle COVID and the level of severity. And in summer of last year, the government also shut down the official website, which would publish daily numbers, making it increasingly difficult to accurately track the progression of COVID. Something else that we noted were the geographical challenges. So 46 million people in Brazil had no access to internet, and 13 million live in low-income households with at least 3 people. So these geographical and infrastructure issues make social distancing nearly impossible for a lot of people. And finally, we noted the insufficient response to COVID-19. So the government failed to implement a systematic lockdown, which forced different regions to self-mandate. This fragmented approach resulted in uneven cases across different areas. So we would see a high number of cases in one region, and then a neighboring region would have a low number of cases. And this caused further difficulties with research, contact tracing, and vaccine distribution. So with that, I'll pass it on to Angela, who will be discussing the economic policies that Brazil implemented and the impact that they had.
All right, so thank you, Jenny. Now let's first take a look at the monetary policies that were adopted by the Central Bank of Brazil. So as you can see here, the central bank has lowered Brazilian federal funds rate to a historical low of 2%. So opening facilities to provide loans and implementing measures to increase liquidity are all actions taken as a means to stimulate the economy. Now moving on to the exchange rate and the balance of payments, the Brazilian real to USD exchange rate has depreciated by about 29%. The central bank has also intervened in the foreign exchange market various times by a total of $44.5 billion. The purpose of this is to ultimately build the reserves and stabilize the exchange rate. Moving on, let's take a look at the fiscal policies adopted by the government and public banks in Brazil. For the government, in order to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19, they involved an escape clause, which is a situation where under special circumstances, the central government can follow a fiscal deficit target in order to better accommodate their spending needs. The emergency measures were included in a separate 2020 budget, so-called WAR, where they were not bound by Brazil's fiscal responsibility law and the constitutional golden rule. Secondly, they expanded the Bolsa Familia program to include more benefits for households, but I will cover this more in depth in the following slide. As for public banks, they have expanded credit lines for businesses and households to support the country's working capital. COVID-19 has also significantly impacted unemployment levels, as you can see here in Figure 1, reaching a record high of 14.6%. As mentioned previously, one of the policies the government has established to combat poverty is through conditional cash transfer programs. This program has helped over 14 million families fight poverty, it has stimulated the job market and improved real gains on minimum wage as of 2020. During October of 2020, Brazil entered into a partnership with the World Bank worth $1 billion to further improve the Bolsa Familia program. These improvements include providing monthly payments to more than 67.8 million low-income families and enrolling an additional 1.2 million families into the program. Once the new families are enrolled, it is expected that the children will attend school and attend regular checkups in order to receive this financial aid. The long-run objective of this program is to ultimately reduce the damage dealt to the country's human capital. As you can see here in Figure 2, Brazil has seen an improvement in the unemployment rate in 2020 as a result of the partnership. So now I'll pass it back to Ginny to introduce the country profile for the UK.
Okay, great. So the UK's GDP is 2.8 trillion US dollars, and they currently rank 21st largest when it comes to population. The UK has 4 distinct countries, so England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and all of which hold varying degrees of self-governance. Now, as of March 2021, there are 4.2 million confirmed COVID cases with a mortality rate of 2.94%. Now here we've prepared a similar COVID timeline. So the first case of COVID was confirmed in January of last year. And the government responded quickly by releasing an action plan that considered different levels of severity for the outbreak. And at that point in time, they also committed 46 million pounds in research funding. Although a new variant was discovered in December, which led to a spike in new cases, as of March, so as of this presentation, more than 25 million people have received at least their first dose of the vaccine, and the number of daily administered doses is about 375,000. So now I'll pass it on to Nancy to discuss the economic policies and the impact that they had in the UK.
Thanks, Jenny. So moving on to some of the macroeconomic circumstances that we see in the UK. The UK is the 6th largest economy in the world, and they sustain this position even after the significant economic shift we saw in 2016 with Brexit. So as Jenny previously mentioned, they have a very unique state structure where the 4 countries operate as fully independent sovereign states. As you can see in figure 3, England actually contributes the most to their GDP with 86.6%. And they currently operate under a conservative government led by Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So they are also a democratic socialist society, similar to Canada. A lot of the essential services such as healthcare and education are either free or heavily subsidized for their citizens. Moving on to some of the key economic policies that the UK implemented, we'll start with some of the fiscal policies such as statutory sick pay and the job retention scheme. So statutory sick pay started fairly early on during the pandemic, with February 2020 seeing businesses with under 250 employees claiming up to 2 weeks sick pay for each COVID-affected employee. So this could be due to hospitalization or just self-isolation. In terms of the job retention scheme, this is more of a stimulus package available where employers can apply for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs grants to subsidize up to 80% of furloughed employees' salaries. And as of December of 2020, over 46 billion pounds in claims were made, spanning across 9.9 million furloughed jobs. Okay, so moving on to some of the assistance provided to small and medium-sized enterprises. In terms of self-employment, the self-employment support scheme started in November of 2020, and it covers up to 40% of average monthly trading profits. And this can be claimed once per period with the maximum claim of £3,750. In terms of startups and small, medium-sized enterprises, we can see from figure 7, the first bar represents pre-COVID revenues, growth and decrease, and the second bar represents post-COVID. So as you can see, the dark blue section means that these businesses, 21% of businesses saw decreased revenues before COVID, and this increased significantly to over 80% of small, medium-sized businesses seeing decreases in revenue after COVID. And to help mitigate these circumstances, the business interruption payment distributed by the government covers up to 12 months of interest payments so that businesses can continue to take out loans and to grow despite the economic circumstances. And they also include a £1.25 billion startup support plan, which includes a £750 million fund for research and development centered businesses. Okay, so moving on to the healthcare system, it's important to note the growth that happened in 2020 in terms of hiring. So we can see here that they hired over 1 million full-time healthcare workers, which is a 6% increase year over year from their new hires in 2019. In total expenditure, they spent over £201 billion on their healthcare in 2020 and 2021, which is a £52 billion increase year over year. And as a result, we see luckily that there have been over 400,000 COVID vaccinations administered weekly as of this year. Okay, now going into the impacts of all of these fiscal policies, in chronological order, starting from the beginning of last year, starting in Q1 and Q2, we see negative GDP growth, and this is likely attributed to the slowdown in economic activity due to the start of the pandemic and the uncertainty. In Q2, this is when we see a lot of the fiscal policies I previously mentioned come into play. So this in combination with the monetary policy being the Bank of England lowering interest rates to 0.1%. We also see an increase in government expenditure. And this is especially important to note because as they are operating under a conservative government, they usually favor a free market approach and do not spend as much as they would in government expenditure. And in the fourth figure here, we can see that usually in the third quarter of 2019, government expenditure accounts for less than 10% of their overall GDP, but this spikes to 31% as of Q2 of 2020. And we can see the results of this come into play in the third quarter, because in the third quarter, we see 16% GDP growth. And this could be attributed also to the lifted stay-at-home measures due to the trough in COVID cases. However, the implications put into place in the previous quarter definitely also have an impact. In the fourth quarter, we see the lockdowns are reinstated, unfortunately, due to the increase in COVID cases and the second wave. So they experienced negative GDP growth once again. Okay, so I'm going to pass it back to Angela to cover shifts in consumer spending.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. I'll give a quick and short comparison between Brazil and UK in terms of the consumer spending. The major difference I want everyone to notice is that Brazil has seen an increase in consumer spending over the last quarter, while the UK households have reduced their spending levels. An important aspect we're able to take away from our analysis is that Brazilians are more likely than the UK to spend the money they receive from government assistance programs, which is likely because of their liquidity constraints. A possible reason as to why UK households may not see as high consumer spending levels is probably due to a lack of confidence in the future economy. And now I will pass it off to Jenny for the final part of our presentation.
Thanks, Angela. I saw the 2-minute mark, so I'll try to get through this quickly. We'll finish our presentation off just by looking at a big picture. So both countries' fiscal deficits will increase, which will boost the economy and encourage more people to spend and invest. And although both countries' GDPs are projected to grow, the UK's policies combined with their COVID response ensures a more sustainable recovery. And finally, the UK's unemployment rate is significantly lower due to the financial assistance programs and the job retention scheme that Nancy mentioned earlier. But we did want to highlight that the Bolsa Familia program didn't start until late last year, and so we could see considerable improvements throughout 2021. And overall, we conclude that the UK better mitigated the economic fallout. So one important takeaway is that Brazil did have sufficient fiscal policies in place. And in fact, they actually spent 8.3% of their GDP last year, which is more than almost every other major emerging market, including more industrialized countries like France and Italy. But the reason why we aren't seeing improvements quite like the UK is because they failed to combine these policies with adequate COVID regulations. And so in terms of short-term COVID recovery, we looked at the projected daily deaths for each country. And in the top graph, you can see that Brazil's cases still haven't peaked. So cases could actually reach up to 1,500 deaths per day in the next few months. And in the bottom graph, we can see that the UK situation has improved and will continue to improve considerably, and they show no sign of a new spike. And finally, in terms of long-term economic recovery, this could depend on many different factors, such as the containment of COVID and the policies that we discussed and how successful they are. But according to the World Data Lab, both countries do fall under a medium recovery path, meaning that both economies will recover by 2023 to 2024. So that's it for us today. Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to us, and we'll open it up for the Q&A portion now.
Okay, thank you so much, Team 3, for both your presentation and for sharing that picture of the three of you in front of the Buckingham Palace. I know it certainly reminded me of a time when tourism and travel were less scary and more exciting concepts. But hey, here's hoping for better times to come. With that said, we're now going to open the floor for a 10-minute Q&A session from our judges. So judges, please feel free to ask our contestants any questions that you may have about their presentation.
I'll begin with a question. So the program with the Bolsa program, partnership program, was credited with reducing the unemployment rate in Brazil substantially in the third quarter of 2020. If you look at Canada, if you look at the United States, if you look anywhere in the world, unemployment rates dropped pretty dramatically in the third quarter, and none of them had this partnership program, this Bolsa kind of partnership program going on. And what makes you think that that was what was behind it, as opposed to other kinds of economic forces?
I can speak to this question first. So we thought that the program has definitely helped reduce unemployment levels because in Brazil, a lot of households have that constraint in terms of like the liquidity and the amount of money that they have to spend. So once this government assistance program was launched, and poor lower income family households were receiving that stimulant, they were able to actually like purchase more items, and this helps stimulate the economy quite a bit, which is why we see that decrease in unemployment levels. I don't know if anyone of my group teammates have anything to add on to that, but that's my point of view for that question.
I can go ahead next if no one else has a question, but maybe it's a good idea to remove the presentation just so we can see each other better. Like stop sharing. My question relates really to how did you really account? I mean, there's a big difference in population, right, between Brazil and the UK. My understanding is like Brazil is around 211 million, and then the UK is around 66 million. So that's 3 times the population in Brazil. In your presentation, when you're talking about some of the financial and economic indicators, you do account for that. But however, when you talk about health outcomes, you sometimes fail to account for it. So you have like total number of deaths or total number of, infected persons. This is something that I think you should have taken into account, right? So having indicators that are truly comparable between the two countries. So the question for you is how could you have accounted for it better? But also a disclaimer that, it was a good presentation, and the task of kind of comparing the response of 2 countries and predicting what will happen is extremely difficult. So yeah, just a good job overall.
I guess I can take this one. Well, first, thank you for your comments. I think for us, we definitely recognize that the 2 countries were very different, especially when it comes to population size and the impact of COVID. And so that's why we wanted to start off by kind of giving an explanation of the wealth inequality and how big that was, especially the geographical challenges. So we tried our best to objectively compare the 2 countries, but one issue that we really faced with Brazil was that we couldn't find as much information that was coming out, especially in the UK. We tried to structure it like Q1, 2, 3, 4, but we weren't able to find that for Brazil. So that was something that we struggled with I guess, comparing them really objectively.
Yeah, thanks. And that makes sense. I'm just going to follow up. I think that the main idea that I wanted to kind of transmit was the use of denominators that make that comparable possible, right? So always when you're trying to do an exercise of comparison, try to find like population now being the issue, you should look at GDP per capita, not GDP in generally, or death, per 100,000 people. And you'll see like these outcome indicators are more common to use when you're comparing countries. Thanks.
Thank you for that feedback.
I have another question about the UK. You mentioned that the UK put a lot of resources into a job retention scheme. An alternative would have been to just increase unemployment insurance. Why do you think the job retention scheme made more sense, or did it?
Sorry, can you repeat the second part of that question?
An alternative to the job retention scheme in the UK would have been to increase unemployment insurance benefits, either make them increase the value of them, make them easier to get, make them last longer. Instead, the UK decided to go with a job retention scheme. Do you think that was a good decision? And if so, why?
I do think it's a good decision to introduce a new program, just because the COVID-19 pandemic was so unique and so sudden that an increase in EI in those programs would most likely have more bureaucracy and more long-term effects. So to introduce specific programs to address the unemployment and the economic struggles that came out of COVID-19 specifically, I feel like it made more sense for them to do that, because COVID-19 is a very unique situation versus, to my understanding, employment insurance is more for things like frictional employment, structural unemployment, and those things that would exist without COVID-19. regardless.
Sorry, can I go ahead?
Yeah.
I just wanted to congratulate you ladies. I think you did a wonderful presentation. I think you were able to identify very clearly which were fiscal policies, which were monetary policies. So I think you did a great job. I was wondering if you have any thoughts. So you mentioned that regarding monetary policies, that both countries lowered their rates. I was wondering what you think about, like, how is this helping the country? How is this helping the economy and people's lives? What's the channel?
So just looking back on the slide, sorry. So at least from my knowledge, when you lower interest rates, it makes it easier for like households and individuals to borrow money, correct? And in that case, you're putting more money out into the economy. And once there's more money in the economy, individuals are more, they're more likely to like spend that money, and which ultimately stimulates the economy and leads to a better future economic outlook, correct? So that's why I feel like, especially during COVID now, and all the central banks are lowering their interest rates, it's ultimately to help stimulate the economy so people buy things and create more jobs and more consumption. So that's what I think their aim is in terms of like lowering the interest rates. I hope that answers your question.
Sorry, Angela, I just want to hop on and add a little bit onto that. For the UK specifically, I know that they decreased the bank rate to 0.01%. So a lot of this went to businesses in construction and development. So in order to sustain and keep growing and not let COVID affect like development of cities and towns, to decrease the loan rate so that companies can still continue to take on these projects while COVID is still happening is very important, so that the long-term effects don't drag on for very long and they're not trying to play a game of catch up once the economy is fully back up and running again.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I believe that elapses the time for your Q&A. So thank you, Team 3. Take a load off. You were the first team to present. That couldn't have been easy. With that said, judges, you now have up to 10 minutes to grade the presentation. In the meantime, we have an exciting icebreaker planned for the attendees. I'm going to hand it over to Samvid now because he's definitely the more fun of the two. Samvid, all yours.
Thanks, Riddhi. So just a basic, we have a word search prepared for all of you students while our judges are grading the presentation. So just give me a second while I share my screen. Hope you all can see it. So on the top of your Zoom, there should be an annotate function. If you go to more, and then there should be annotate there. So feel free to annotate and find these words. And judges, if you are done presenting, feel free to participate in this as well. I'm surprised no one's found a word yet.
Sorry, I don't know if anyone else is having this problem, but I can't find the annotate button.
I don't know where the annotate.
Okay, so
for me.
Give me a second.
I'm having the same issue. I cannot find the annotate button.
Okay, so if you go to view options, it should be there. It's usually at the top of the Zoom screen. Was anyone able to find it? Oopsie.
When I click the view, I have show manage participants and show chat. So
Okay. I'll let everyone take a break now, and then we'll try to get it sorted out for the next break. Sorry about that.
Hey, what event's complete without technical difficulties, right? So it's all good.
Yeah, we could go to find Waldo now. For that, we don't need annotation anyways, and then we'll figure out the annotation and come back to it. Samit?
It might be weird seeing so many people together, but we have to find Waldo. I guess for this one, we could just type in the chat if someone sees it. That might be hard, but we can try find him together. By the yellow boots. I have no idea where the yellow boots are.
Like the table in the center, just above it.
Okay, this isn't really working without the annotation function. But I trust that people have found him, so we can move on to the next one. Yeah, this one's a rough one. This one was like a backup one in case there's other problems, so good luck. And I actually analyzed this one, but there's a lot of tiny things that go into these Find Waldo pictures. And so you can truly appreciate the art here. Yeah, no, presenting is the easy part. Finding Waldo is the hard part.
Speak for yourself. My hands are sweating buckets, but it's all good.
We have about 2 more minutes and then we'll get on to the next presentation. So 2 more minutes to find Waldo here. If not, we can try again in the next break. Okay, maybe let's move on to the next one and then we can go back to that one later.
just gonna give another minute or two. We already have 4 responses. We're just waiting for one more.
In the near center. Wrong word, Danny. I'm gonna try to help you here. Yeah, we got the annotate function sorted out, so maybe I'll pull up these in the next break and we can actually point it out later. Next to the little green screen. My mouse passed by it. Somewhere here. This green inflatable? Above it, is that him? Well, okay, I'll take it. We should have the presentations judged by now. So I think, yeah, I'll pass it on to Ridley. Thank you everyone for participating. Hopefully they annotate words for the word search next time. But yeah.
Yeah, someone has to play bad cop. I'm back presenting for your next presentation. So up next, we have Team 9 comprised of Jaheen Nawar, Alia Asgar, Soumya Shahzad, and Advait Shankar. I'm going to remind you again that you have 15 minutes to present. I'm going to wave when you have 3 minutes to go, but we're also going to put it in the chat. Whichever you see is fine. But yeah, Team 9, the floor is yours. Good luck.
Okay. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Alia Asgar, and my team is Jaheen Nawar, Soumya Shahzad, and Advait Shankar are here to present to you the response of Brazil and UK on COVID. So, Mike Ryan, an epidemiologist at the World Health Organization, said in regards to a response, it has to be fast and have no regrets. If you need to be right before you move, you will never win. And one common theme between all of the successful countries that have responded to COVID-19 is that they're quick. However, this is not the case with the UK and Brazil. And the reason we are interested in the UK and Brazil is because even though they both have the delayed response, their situations before COVID have put them in compromising positions, and we were interested in seeing how they will bounce back. So in the agenda, first we discuss the problem, then we'll explain why the UK and Brazil discussed it. Next, we'll discuss the UK and Brazil public health policy, the fiscal policy, and the monetary policy, and then summarize and compare and contrast. Lastly, we look at future trends and open the floor to questions. So now I pass it on to my colleague.
To see the impact of the pandemic on these two countries, we must start by understanding the structure of their economies. The UK has had steady GDP growth for the past 5 years, but slowed down in 2018 amidst the Brexit confusion. The UK is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, with a total value of exports of goods and services from the UK at about 30% of its GDP. This makes the UK the 5th largest importer and exporter in the world. Of the GDP, household consumption is the largest element of expenditure across the economy, accounting for 58% of its economy in 2020. Government consumption followed at 23% and investment at 18%. Services are the largest part of the economy, and in 2019, it accounted for 79% of output. Goods production stood at 13% and agriculture at a low 1%. Next slide, please. On the other hand, in the Brazilian economy, services contribute to about 63% of the GDP in 2019, but it leads in a variety of agricultural related goods. Additionally, compared to the UK, the Brazilian economy also only has exports with a total value of only 14.8% of the country's GDP. Furthermore, Brazil has had a slowdown in GDP growth, with the past five-year real GDP growth averaging at a negative 0.5% since 2015. Currently, the Brazilian economy is facing major economic challenges, including poverty reduction, improving factor productivity, reining in public sector debt, and ensuring environmentally sustainable growth.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. While Brazil and the UK adopted many of the typical public health response strategies seen around the world, such as international travel restrictions and the development of a contact tracing app, albeit occasionally at a slower pace, they have largely been unable to stem the spread of the pandemic meaningfully, with the Lawi Institute ranking the Brazilian response to COVID-19 the worst out of 98 countries it analyzed, and the UK response as 66th of the 98 countries. Some of the reasons Brazil's COVID-19 policy response has been so weak is the generalized anti-science approach that many of its government institutions have adopted, the dissemination of propaganda to this effect in an attempt to dilute the accuracy of the information Brazilians are receiving about the pandemic, and the capture of institutions in an attempt to prioritize the economy and concentrating state power over the right to healthcare, safety, and information. Next slide, please. The UK government's initial dithering and lackluster response has been similarly visible in the late procurement of PPE kits, the arguably delayed imposition of a lockdown in March, the reluctance to screen international arrivals from many countries out of the belief that imported cases would not significantly increase transmission, and the hasty measures to open up in the summer, sidestepping fears of a second wave. Political aims, like in Brazil, have similarly occasionally trumped securing public health in the UK. However, the UK leadership has been more forthright in acknowledging the severity of the pandemic than their Brazilian counterparts. I will now pass it on to my colleague.
The coronavirus had a major external contractionary effect on all economies in the world. To counter this, many countries have made efforts to pump money into the economy to build up their demand again. This can be done through increasing government spending and or decreasing taxes. Therefore, the Brazil's Minister of Finance introduced a $150 billion fiscal package, which is almost worth 10% of Brazil's GDP. This includes transfer payments to support the vulnerable population and help finance the budget of multiple businesses. Additionally, state-owned businesses have offered credit lines to small and medium enterprises. These measures encourage companies to continue running and people to continue consuming. Next slide, please. Similarly, the UK also implemented expansionary policies into its country. In 2020 alone, the UK economy contracted by 10%, so the country has made efforts to reverse this by providing support to a variety of groups of people. Firstly, to support households and families, the government has added additional funding for the NHS by roughly 48.5 billion pounds sterling. Secondly, they have invested 29 billion pounds sterling to support businesses, both big and small. Thirdly, they strengthened the safety net to support vulnerable people by increasing payments under the Universal Credit Scheme. Next slide, please. In addition to this, the government paid 80% of self-employed workers' salaries from March through May. They also made 3 separate loan schemes to facilitate business access to credit, which includes a coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, large business interruption loan schemes, and bounce back loan scheme. The purpose of these intensive fiscal policies is to encourage spending during a time of uncertainty. Pumping money into the economy will build up demand for goods, which will increase the production and then cycle back by increasing income in households.
All right, now we will talk about the monetary policies that have been implemented by the Brazilian government. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused Brazil to spiral into its deepest recession in decades, with the economy contracting 9.7% in the Q2 of 2020. This has severely threatened to jeopardize Brazil's already slow recovery from a previous recession. Their central bank has lowered the policy rate by 225 basis points since mid-February of 2020 to a historically low of 2% only. Measures to increase liquidity in the financial system has also been implemented. In addition, the reserve requirement has been reduced from 25% to 17% on top of an already previous reduction of 6 points in early March. The central bank has also opened a facility to provide loans to financial institutions backed by private corporate bonds as collaterals. Now, changed capital requirements for small financial institutions has allowed banks to reduce provisions for liabilities provided that the funds are lent to small businesses. Now, in addition, the central bank has also to financial institutions backed by creditors into the central bank through a swap facility that still remains in place. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about the monetary policies implemented by the Bank of England. So in early March, the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, otherwise known as MPC, set their policy in accordance to meet the target inflation rate of 2%. And accordingly, on March 19th, they voted to increase the Bank of England's holding of UK government bonds and sterling non-financial investment-grade corporate bonds by £200 billion. Now, this was financed by insurance of central bank reserves. Now, all of this was an attempt to increase the money supplies, which will help reduce the bank rate by 15 basis points to a historically low of 0.1%. Now, when the interest rates are this low, it is sometimes difficult for banks to further reduce deposit rates, which in turn could limit their ability to cut their lending rates. This could dampen the effect of monetary policy. So in order to maximize the effectiveness of the monetary policy, their organization over the year offered a 4-year funding/loan plan to small businesses equivalent to at least 10% of their stocks at an interest rate equivalent to or very close to the bank rate, which is 0.1%. Now, this is an attempt to make sure that the reduction in the bank rate actually reflects onto the real economy so that businesses and households can benefit from MPC's action. This further provided participants with a cost-effective source of funding to support additional lending, providing insurance against adverse conditions in banking funding markets. What this does is help the bank expand lending by reducing the amount of their financial resources that they have to personally loan out to businesses and households. Now I'll pass this on to my colleague, Alia. So the actual impact of Brazil's policies on the macroeconomy has entailed a massive government expenditure entailed through these policies and has cushioned the impact of the reduced American GDP growth, as well as increasing the government's national debt by 15%. Keeping in line with the spending cap on government expenditure introduced in 2016, the Brazilian government does not plan to maintain expansionary fiscal policy to the same extent. However, a lot of other actors are not ready to pick up demand by themselves. So currently, Brazil is really picking up any demand that a lot of other actors are not able to do. However, other economists do believe that the nature of the Brazilian debt, as well as its high level of foreign reserves, suggest that this is not a bigger dilemma as it may seem. In comparison, you can look at the UK, and you can see here that the magnitude of the recession by the pandemic is unprecedented. And as my colleague said, it has been the lowest it has ever been before. And predictions as of 2020 include it dropping a lot. And in the actual impact of the UK's policies, the percentage of business with currency trading has fallen at 82%. And by June 21st, once everything opens up, all legal lists on social contracts will be removed and all sectors of the economy are expected to reopen. Expectations of 2020 is that large banks will suspend dividends and buybacks until the end of 2020. And in December 2020, the Prudent Regulation Authority announced its intention to return towards a standard framework for bank distributions.
As we can see, the UK has far surpassed Brazil, or for that matter, the wider European average in the administration of vaccine doses per 100 people. While the results of Brazil's vaccination policy don't seem particularly poor when compared with the global or regional average, it is a testament to the pseudo-scientific policies pursued by the Brazilian Health Ministry that Brazil's vaccination per capita isn't higher, and it isn't expected to be either, for the next few months at least. This, coupled with the rapidly increasing caseload, could have dire consequences for the economic health of Brazil. Next slide, please.
So in our summary of key findings, we find that although UK had a much more late response, it was a move made to decrease the magnitude of impact it would have to the imports and exports, which are a huge part of the economy. And through enforcing these strict regulations, supporting local businesses, freezing the interest rate to help consumers struggling with jobs, and an effective vaccine implementation, it has sped up its recovery while preserving as much of the economy as it can. In addition, predictions as of October 2020 had said that the GDP is set to contract in the fourth quarter of the virus and to fall by 11.2% in 2020 as a whole. However, nominal GDP increased by 1.6% in quarter 4 2020 and fell by only 4.8% on annual basis in 2020, driven by only the decline in the first and second quarters with the initial COVID responses. In comparison, while Brazil's initial response prevented an economic slowdown to the same extent as many other countries, these challenges to the Brazilian economy pose the question of whether or not it will be sustainable in the long run and how they will react to more waves. Brazil was already struggling with government debt as it was hit with waves of the pandemic, and while it has made a commendable effort to support citizens during such a challenging time, its efforts are not enough to invest in citizens to make them more independent. We find that when the expected future trends, according to the IMF, there will be an initial, a slow labor reallocation and GDP recovery soon. However, with Brazil, if it wants to recover, it has to do more than what it's doing now, especially in enhancing competitiveness and fiscal health. Not only will that likely ensure a long-term potential GDP growth, but it is expected to also draw adequate support from investors, keeping borrowing costs low. We thank you for listening, and we now open the floor to any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Team 9. Again, didn't mean to play bad cop and add pressure in the last 2 minutes, but it is what it is. With that said, judges, we now have the 10-minute Q&A session. Please feel free to ask your questions.
Let me ask a question about the labor market. Suppose we want to assess the impact of the various policies on the labor market. You didn't say too much about that. How would you go about it? What would you look at? What statistics would you focus on?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So suppose we want to assess the impact of the various policies that we saw in the two countries on the labor market. Right? Like how right? Like there have been big changes in the labor market, obviously, as a result of COVID itself. Suppose we want to see how policy mitigated that. How would you what would you focus at, or what statistic, what data would you like to have?
So with the labor market, we noticed that it went down for most countries. So it was kind of like not a strong indicator of its response, because a lot of countries did have it go down. But if we were to put it in, we would notice how much they were able to cushion the response before, like when they were still trying to mitigate any risk and keeping the economy open, versus how much later on the unemployment decreased is what we will look at to compare both of the countries. We also know with Brazil and UK, they were facing different circumstances. So Brazil was also dealing with with Brexit and trying to adjust to new markets, as well as now COVID crisis. And Brazil was already at such like a low in like depth wise, and so those unemployment rates were kind of hard to estimate in a way that would probably let us compare more accurately. Anyone wants to add on this too?
Thanks.
I have a question. Under the slide for Brazilian monetary policy, there was support for the airlines, and I didn't understand that. Was the Central Bank of Brazil lending money directly to the airlines, or was it the federal government that was providing support or to the airlines through the Treasury?
And is there a difference in Brazil, may I ask, between the federal government and the central bank?
Just to let you know, we do have Michael here as well. He is our 6th judge. And yeah, just wanted to put it out there.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry, guys, for I have some medical issues that were valid that kept me from being here. So I'm sorry about that.
No, that's perfectly all right. Elia, could you stop sharing your screen and we can go back to the question then? Okay, perfect.
I think I could like take this. We're not entirely sure about like what the details of the policy and about there being like a difference between like the Brazilian government and the central bank. Yes, but also like
that was a joke. Sorry, that was a joke.
Sorry. Oh God, sorry. I'm stressed. Sorry.
That's where I could answer the question about it. So okay. Their central bank, the Bank of Brazil, what they have done is they have lowered their interest rates. They have lowered their interest rate quite significantly to increase lending, to keep them in a sense, to stimulate the economy. And otherwise, they have not directly loaned any government. The government has not directly loaned money to anybody, but their central bank has loaned money to the airlines, but with very, very low interest rate. Not that the government was helping them to the treasury, as opposed to just central bank lowering their interest.
Thank you for that. Yeah, maybe one thing I wanted to ask is, or bring your attention to is, we speak about the labor market. You talk about, I don't know what the word you used exactly. It was lower or it was worse. I don't know. The definition of the labor market is, I think, very important. In the fact that there probably is, definitional differences between the UK and Brazil as far as how is unemployment rate calculated, assuming your unemployment rate that you're referring to as a labor market indicator, because again, there is differences in definitions as far as, the military sometimes included, sometimes it's not. There are differences, even between US and Canada. And secondly, now with COVID, there's the additional issue with, some people can work from home, and, in the service industry, the professional services in particular have done quite well. But obviously services industries that require contact between people are the ones that have been hit the hardest. And there will be, I guess it's just something to consider for future research. If you guys go into research in academia or private sector even, I mean, it's just, you need to make sure you understand what you're looking at and what you're measuring, and don't be afraid of quantifying or trying to use statistics or econometrics to find links between policy and outcomes. I think it's very important. It's something that is not done enough, I think, in the private sector or public sector at this point. So just a couple of points, but well done. You guys have done quite well. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, of course.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that presentation. Oh, sorry. Anyone want to go first? Oh, Shireen. Okay.
Go for it.
So I just want to first of all say, thank you for the presentation. That was a good job. I have a few comments just on the presentation in general. Might go not too much into the econ of it, but I thought they were worth pointing out because they might be helpful. So the first one is, it would have benefited, honestly, a bit from some more data visualization. especially when presenting. Even sometimes when you did have that data visualization, it didn't really like match necessarily what you were saying. I remember there was a slide where there was something about the, oil sector, and then but the text didn't really match that, so that got me a bit confused. And then we had a bit less and less visualization. So that's just the point, and try to avoid reading what's on the slide, because we can all see that. Sorry, you're the second team, so we can be a bit tougher on you. Yeah, so that's my comment. Otherwise, yeah, I would have wanted, I don't know if the group after you will be doing that, but it would have been interesting to also mention the new variants of the virus, which are emerging in, it just happens, both the UK and Brazil. So that would have been an important point to mention as well during your presentation.
Thank you for your feedback.
I don't know if we still have time for questions. Yeah,
we do.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really good. Thank you, guys. There was this slide, I want to say in Brazil's fiscal policy, that you mentioned that the government's not continuing with its expansionary fiscal policy, but that other actors are not ready yet to get involved. What do you think it means? Like, which other actors are we talking about?
So in regards to that, when we were like kind of analyzing the Brazil, we noticed that the government is doing a lot to help its people in regards to both like relief and trying to find like places. However, that demand is not really being supported by like the same initiatives as other actors and other like companies in Brazil to help putting in more. And so unlike UK, which was very strong in its imports and exports beforehand, that's like they had to kind of deal with Brexit and COVID-19 at the same time. But in Brazil, there was already a huge debt happening, and there wasn't really a major sector besides oil that they could really kind of work with, which is why it was kind of hard for like, it's weird to kind of put each of the sports together because they're at different levels. Even though the government did do a lot of things, because the companies weren't able to match that support, Brazil wasn't really able to recover their economy, and they're more in debt than they were before. And it's very hard to see any expected trends unless they encourage more competitiveness.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I believe that elapses the time. Thank you, Team 9. Take a load off. Your reason for taking a load off, of course, is because the judges were tougher on you than they were on Team 1, I believe. You now have 10 minutes to grade the presentation judges, after which we'll move on to the last presentation of the day. In the meantime, of course, we have another exciting activity planned. So again, I'm going to hand it over to the more fun of the two hosts, Samvid.
Thanks, Ridley. So sorry, everyone, but the annotate function, we couldn't fix it. We changed it, but apparently mid-meeting, it does not, like, the setting does not change. So I do have Jeopardy pulled up. Hope that's a more fun activity for everyone. And I put it as no team, so everyone.
It's not economics. Wow, human body. Come on, this is an economics class. Should have. Anyway. I'm not criticizing, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
No, we had fun puzzles and crosswords planned for economics, but hey, technology, right?
And you need beer, I think, with that, usually. So maybe when COVID's over, we can get together for beer and do this. If you guys drink. If you don't drink, you can drink, whatever. Sorry, I don't mean to.
Yes, this is restricted to 19 plus also.
All right, so we're good with that. Okay.
Anyway, I don't have any teams planned, so anyone can feel free to like put it in the chat or participate. It's a team effort, so let's try to maximize our score. So any category, human body 500. Okay, let's go. What is the human's body's biggest organ? Skin. Okay.
I'd like to. What is biggest? How do you define biggest? I mean, volume, surface area, weight. There's a lot of different. Anyway.
Let's go surface area for now.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I'm going to reveal the correct answer. I have a couple skin answers, so.
Lungs, no. Or intestines.
It is the skin. Congratulations, Nancy and Nikki. Okay. I don't know how this works. I just like pulled it up. So hopefully you got 500 points. Animals 500 for Nikki. Okay. Food 500 actually first for Angela. Let's do food 500. Deer meat is also known by what name? You can, oh, I have a couple of venisons. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. I'm sorry if I butchered that, but.
It is.
Okay. Reveal correct answer. Damn. Good job, good job.
Wow, I did not know that.
1,000 points for Team UEC case competition. I think Nikki asked for animals.
The judges get points too. Can we have a competition between the judges? I'm just kidding.
Let's do it.
No.
Let's do Michael versus the UEC team.
It's okay. Sorry. Sorry, guys. I'm just being a goof.
We should do that. We should do Michael versus the case competition students.
That's how I played soccer when I came to Canada. It was me against however many guys that showed up. Whichever team was on, I was winning. So.
Anyway, let's go animals 500 for Nikki. Which bird beats his wings 60 to 80 times per second?
Yeah.
Oh, I know this one.
Said it, I believe her.
It's easy.
Okay. Damn, we're 1,500 points up.
Anybody know where an M2 socket goes in the motherboard? Any comp sci grads? No? Okay. Continue. Please continue. Sorry. That's
1,000 points for whoever answers that. I have a right side, Michael. Someone says right side. Is that correct?
Well, it's saying it's right by the RAM, but I'm looking at it and I can't, it looks like this, M2 socket, but I can't find it in the motherboard. See, my motherboard is over there. Anyway, if you guys know at some point, maybe I might need some help, but please continue with this. This is the last disturbance of everything. Sorry.
Okay, let's go food 300. Which trees can be tapped for their sap to make maple syrup? Fellow Canadians, you need to answer this.
Okay, I have to chime in. If somebody doesn't know this answer, then you should not be living in this country. I think. And just read the question. I think you'll figure it out.
This is a citizenship test question, yeah.
Not to say that people who can't answer it shouldn't stay here, but you should consider whether we might be better off in different places. This is something that's important for Canadians.
No, I believe my team. Everyone answered maple tree. There were a few confused people. All the answers have question marks, but that's because you scared them, Michael.
Okay, just a tiny update. We got the scores from 4 judges. It's Hamad that's left. Hamad, are you having any trouble accessing it?
Am I using the wrong form? Maybe I submitted the responses. Could you send me a private message with the link?
Yes, I will.
Form? Okay, maybe I'm using the wrong one.
All right, so while we got that sorted, let's do a couple more. We do have 100% score as of now, so any other categories? Animals 400, let's do it. What kind of animal is barracuda? Fish. Let us check. Nice. Maybe for the next break, I'll pull up a harder one. This is too easy for y'all. General 500. What is the second biggest country in the world? The first biggest is Russia with around 6.6 million square meters.
Yeah, if you can't answer this, the same applies as the previous question, I think.
I have some Canada and some
This one. You guys should know.
Some Australia, some Canada. More Canada. I'll give a couple more seconds for more answers. We have to.
We have it in all caps also. It's Canada.
All right, I think majority says Canada, and that is correct. Professors, you should be scared. Our students are getting 100%.
Hey, I'm not a prof. I just work here.
No, we have some professors as judges as well on the call.
No, I know. I'm kidding. I said respect to them. I'm not. So.
All right, maybe one more. General 300. How many cards are in a deck of cards? Okay, this is too easy. Yep, 52.
This is actually an ambiguous question. There are many decks of cards. I play with Neapolitan cards, and there are 40 cards in my deck, not 52.
Well, I guess I'll get it wrong then, because Professor Angelo doesn't agree with your answer.
Oh, Professor Angelo is here. Wow.
No, I'm pointing out that there are multiple answers to this
wow.
question.
Hi, Prof. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
All right, I think we have. Are we good to go, Spandana?
Yeah, we're just waiting on Hamad, but I think we can move on.
Yeah,
we can come back to it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Over to you, Riddhi.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. Clearly, at the UEC, we endeavor to keep things spicy, as you guys have. So last but not least, this is our very last presentation of the day. Team 10, comprised of Muhammad Ali Sajid, Malcolm McDermott, David Hallam, and Niranjan Jagdish Vaswani. Again, you have 15 minutes. I'm going to wave when you have 3 minutes left and also put it in the chat. Best of luck. The floor is yours.
Welcome. Good evening. Thank you, everyone. My name is David Hallam. I'm in Team 10. We're grateful to be here, and we're grateful to have all of you here listening. Our project seeks to highlight and juxtapose the efforts of France and Germany in mitigating the economic downturn that has sparked as a result of the pandemic. Our focus will be on labor markets and the unemployment rate in both countries. Next slide. In choosing to analyze both countries, in choosing to analyze France and Germany, we're taking a pair of Eurozone economic powerhouses with a lot of similarities, but we found some important distinctions that we think reflect well in terms of the policies selected and how those policies affected the unemployment in the countries. France's economy is strong and is built on the back of a strong service industry, but with slow annual GDP growth since the global recession in 2008, as well as a current account deficit and high unemployment. It's doing well, but it's perhaps struggling relatively. Conversely, you have Germany, which boasts an even larger economy. Germany has enjoyed strong unemployment since the recession, as well as has been operating at a current account surplus. Germany also utilizes a social market economy, which features collaboration between market and non-market agents. Both countries incorporate strong social safety nets for their citizens into their economy. Next slide. We also have an overview of timelines in terms of response. Here you can see we've just given a brief overview of timing in terms of fiscal and monetary policy, as well as some other measures from restaurant closures to lockdown. Next slide. Looking at monetary policy, as both countries are in the Eurozone, they are both under the regulation of the ECB, the European Central Bank. In terms of policy, the ECB focused on reinforcing the roles of banks in financial markets, and allowing those two institutions to fully intermediate in economic activity for the countries. The Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program saw the ECB purchase a significant number of bonds from countries under the program, which had an immediate stabilizing effect. Meanwhile, they also incentivized banks to adjust the targeted longer-term refinancing operations in order to incentivize lending. Next slide. But in terms of fiscal policy, we chose to focus on the short-time working schemes present in both countries. This is a fiscal policy measure. Both countries have had short-time working schemes for several years, with distinctions between the two. Just as a refresher, short-time working schemes incentivize employers to, rather than lay off employees in economic downturn, to reduce the hours of workers. They do this by, the government does this by reimbursing the government. The government does this by reimbursing employers for the money, for the replacement income, with varying degrees of reimbursement, as well as varying degrees of payment to the employees. Now, short-time working schemes don't create jobs and they don't encourage job seeking. They have their issues, they have their flaws, but they work as insulation against labor market shocks and work to keep employment numbers low in periods of economic downturn. Next slide. Now, in France, prior to the pandemic, France has been operating the short-term work scheme for a while. France has two short-time working schemes. France has partial unemployment, or chômage partiel, and they have the extended short-time working, which is the APLB. Now, the French short-time working schemes are a little complex. As I mentioned, there are two major numbers when it comes to short-time working schemes. There's the amount that's reimbursed to the employee who's part of the scheme, and there's the amount reimbursed to the employer by the government. So in France, the calculation of these values varies on a number of variables, from the size of the firm to certain regulations to which scheme is being selected. These schemes are very much in the hands of the companies. It's very much firm side in France. The schemes have lacked appeal, though, because of some issues in terms of internal flexibility in the French labor market, especially with regards to the APLD, which has certain restrictions, including when employers are allowed to let go of employees who are on the APLD. Meanwhile, in Germany, the short-term work scheme, or Kurzarbeit, as it's known, is much simpler and less complex. It's incorporated right into the unemployment insurance system of the country. So it's a lot more familiar to the employers and the employees. It also works with a fixed rate of replacement income to the employees, which is about 60 to 67%, depending on whether they have children. The scheme is significantly more popular in Germany and is also been very successful in Germany. It was a major part of how well they dealt with the 2008 crisis. Next slide. Just to engage in some direct comparison, as I said, in Germany, the system is incorporated right into the National Unemployment Insurance Scheme. As such, it's less, but because of certain restrictions on thresholds and working time of the employees, it's a little less convenient for employers. Meanwhile, in France, while being more firm focused, it's less popular due also to certain restrictions. Next slide. As I mentioned, both countries made significant changes for this specific pandemic. In France, the French government expanded eligibility while also improving the process for application. They increased rates for both employers and employees. And also as a result, as a byproduct of the complexity of the schemes, they also had to clarify and simplify certain things in order for it to be clear which sectors were affected by the schemes, which sectors could apply for the schemes. They also loosened things on the APLD. However, this was done in March, by the way. However, in response to the second wave, a lot changed in the French scheme. The focus now was on very specific sectors affected, including the service industry, which is, as I mentioned, is the backbone of their economy. So the French short-time working scheme in the second wave focused on sectors that were hit the hardest, while loosening and reducing the benefits to companies not deemed to be struggling as much. Next slide. Meanwhile, in Germany, there was some ease in the way they went about changing things. They removed essentially all of the aforementioned restrictions that made it somewhat inconvenient. They extended the duration. They removed mandates on minimums and social security contributions. They allowed the short-time working scheme to apply to more potential workers, while also making it so that it has greater financial impact the longer it goes on. So as the slide says, in month 4, as well as in month 8 of the scheme, now it has increases. Now I'll switch over to, next slide. Now I'll pass it over to my colleague, Malcolm.
So here we see the unemployment rate for France since the 2008 financial crisis, where it has sustained a higher level of unemployment above 9% for about 10 years, only decreasing to about pre-crisis levels in 2019 and 2020 to see it spike again as a result of the pandemic. And it had a relatively large spike of about 3 percentage points going back to the level it had post-crisis. Next slide. In contrast, the German unemployment rate decreased steadily and rather well following the 2008 financial crisis, getting down to about 5% and remained stable there since 2019, and only had a small increase of about 1.5 percentage points following the pandemic. Next slide. This could be partly contributed to the short-term work schemes that both countries placed and how they differed and the different impacts they had. For Germany, as mentioned, they reduced the employer side restrictions, and that increased the benefits for the workers. Meanwhile, in France, towards the second half, they started to become more specific and directed in their attempts with the work scheme, only focusing their money on the companies that were most significantly hit. Next slide. What this means for the possible success of the short-term work schemes: Germany's seemed rather significant as the labor market remained strong, as Germany's almost always has. But for France, the French economist Charlotte de Montreal has noted that in April and May, the French short-term work scheme accounted for about 25% of the employment. Meanwhile, in November and December, it was 6% and 3% respectively. As a result of France becoming much more specific and targeted, there was a significant decrease in enrollment for this work scheme. Next slide. And now looking at the impacts of the monetary policies for the credit markets in Germany, looking at figure 4, in blue, you see the new mortgage agreements throughout from week by week for 2020. When compared to 2019, you see that it increased just about every single week throughout the year. And this increase has remained consistent through 2021. And this is specifically because the ECB has focused their target to be on mortgage agreements, and that shows in the new loan agreements on the right, that has decreased. So it shows that the banks in Germany were focused specifically on the housing market to attempt to sustain investment throughout the pandemic. Next slide. And now looking at the French housing market, this is consistent, and you can see that the housing markets remain strong in both countries. Looking at the fixed rate mortgages throughout the year 2020 and into 2021, it remained relatively stable. It only increased around November to December in the second wave of the pandemic and the second lockdown, because France noticed that there was not as much of a surge in the housing market as there was in the first wave, in the first lockdown. And they were predicting an inflationary recovery period throughout 2021. So the rates are likely to remain higher throughout this year as well. Next slide. Looking at the effects of short-term work on different economic factors, we have some graphs, would be best for the next slide. So on the left, you see the French GDP over the years has consistently increased, but relatively slower than Germany's, seen on the right, and had a much bigger drop seen in Q2 of 2020, as opposed to the drop seen in Germany. It's hard to say if both of them are already stabilizing out in GDP, as data is still coming in and it's quarter by quarter. But you can see that from Q3 to Q4, France experienced another drop, whereas Germany remained consistent. So it suggests that it's possible that Germany is already finding their feet again, whereas France is still struggling to find theirs. Next slide. But you'll see on the top left graph, we're showing the new job postings as a percentage change since February of 2020. The red line is French and the green line is German. And there was significantly less job loss in France than Germany. However, both did see job loss in terms of new postings present. This could possibly be explained by France investing more into a new and green economy seen in the figure 10 in the bottom left. They were focusing on different industries and sectors to try and make them more green. And this could perhaps be a driving force in creating new jobs. Meanwhile, Germany did not create the same amount of investment and instead was focusing on the short-term work, which, as David said, does not create a stimulus for new jobs. Meanwhile, just keeps people secure in the ones they have. And looking at the right, for the public debt, the top right figure 9, you'll see that French public debt is projected to continue to remain high throughout the coming years. Meanwhile, the German public debt is looking to return to the pre-crisis levels by 2026. The difference in these could possibly be explained by the fact that that Germany is running a current account surplus before the pandemic, as mentioned by David before, whereas France was running a deficit. And next slide. Looking for the future outlook, it's important to see how their vaccines rollout plan is progressing, because that will determine when they can open up the economy again and how long they must sustain these policies for. Germany's vaccine rollout plan has unfortunately hit some delays as a result of supply of the vaccines. So they're looking that it's likely that they will have to continue these policies a little longer through 2021. But with a strong start and they already seem to be stable, it may not be as big an issue. Meanwhile, for France, their vaccine schedule is continuing to be on track, but they will still have to deal with a weaker labor market as compared to Germany, and also a higher public debt. Both of these could perhaps be solved with the greater investment into the greener economy. Having the new sectors for new jobs could stimulate new jobs for their greener economy and reduce the unemployment. And they'll eventually be able to try and create the money invested from there to reduce the public debt. That's it for us. Thank you for listening, and we'll open the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Team 10. I believe the judges might be a little extra harsh on you, so all the very best. With that said, we have 10 minutes. Judges, please feel free to ask your questions to Team 10.
I have a question. One of the slides drew a link between the external balance, the current account surplus or deficit, and the government level of debt. What's the link?
Which slide?
You had a slide that said Germany was more likely to return to fiscal balance than France, and you drew an allusion that it had something to do with the current account surplus. I want to know what that link is.
Oh, just the implication was just with France operating at a current account deficit, it was just used as a marker of a more struggling economy as compared to Germany. Our emphasis has been on showing that Germany's more stable economy and has allowed the implementation of the short-time work scheme to be better and be more effective. Essentially, the short-time work scheme is sort of like a band-aid, right? And it doesn't really solve any concrete issues while also having its own detractions. And so while it's been somewhat effective in France, the effectiveness is less because of mentioned relative economic struggle relative to Germany.
I have another question, if you don't mind. You talk a lot about unemployment in your presentation. I was wondering if, specifically my question is, what type of unemployment is most relevant in the case of COVID-19? So just as a hint for you guys, there are different types: frictional, structural, cyclical. And how do you identify which one is, like the impact of COVID on each? Like what is an approach that you didn't do in this presentation, but that might be useful to, kind of isolate what might be caused by COVID?
I'll take a crack at this. In terms of unemployment as an indicator, it has limitations, I would say. As we sort of hinted with the reference to Charlotte de Montreal, unemployment, especially in terms of COVID, will mask some things. Unemployment only covers people in the labor force, and because so many people as a result of COVID have moved out of the labor force, there are certainly elements of that our analysis didn't take into account. Also, as mentioned, short-time work schemes do have some correlation to retaining underemployment by retaining certain jobs that would have been phased out by the economy otherwise. So that was also something that perhaps could have been paid more attention. In terms of types of unemployment, the French economy has chosen to focus on sectors linked to tourism, sectors where tourism and sort of consumers coming in person are definitely more important, and whereas Germany is focused sort of more broadly. Aside from that, I don't know if Malcolm has something to say.
I would add mostly about the underemployment issues that could arise from short-term work schemes, because as David mentioned, it will allow jobs to persist throughout the pandemic that likely would have been phased out with a more optimal and more effective allocation of labor. So while that could be part of the reason why Germany's unemployment has remained relatively low throughout the pandemic, I would say looking back over the last 10 years, how it has consistently dropped over time and slowly year to year, I believe that that's more indicative of a strong labor market for Germany relative to France.
All right, great. So some parts of the question were answered. Just to leave time for other judges, the thing I was hinting for would have been interesting to compare the changes in unemployment to, let's say, years before COVID, and see what is different, because unemployment was always there, right, to different degrees. And so one approach that you could have adopted is kind of doing this comparison between the years. Obviously, doesn't establish causality, but it could be a better indicator.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
Can I ask a question, or yeah, I think can I ask a question? What I was wondering about is, talk about these different needs for for business or for firms that have been affected by it. I wonder if you guys have thought about potential for, first of all, moral hazard, or giving people money or giving money in times of stress, economic stress. And secondly, I'm looking at this for that. Secondly, have you thought about the differences, giving money to consumers as taxpayers, really returning it to the taxpayer so that they can stimulate the economy, versus giving it to the businesses who employ the consumers who will then spend the money. Is there any, in research, have you guys thought about or looked at the benefits of each one, and whether one or the other was being used in France, Germany, or has there been any differences? I'm just trying to understand, ascertain what the major differences were besides the economic competition.
I could address the issues of moral hazard that both governments could have run into with this. The short-term work schemes, while they've been lasting for a long time, their restrictions were significantly reduced because of the pandemic. However, I would imagine that since the Eurozone as a whole is always focused more so on a social safety net, as opposed to, I guess, forward-looking to dampen any possible problems, they've more so focused on helping people sustain through it. I would imagine that for the most part, firms would act accordingly and continue to work as they have, because these short-term work schemes are something that have been lasting since the 2008 financial crisis. So I don't know if there would be certainly moral hazard issues, and likely the French government may have saw that for themselves, because in the second lockdown in November and December, they reduced the short-term work scheme for certain sectors and certain companies, and we're only focusing on those that were most affected by the pandemic.
Yeah, and that's the right approach, I think. I mean, ultimately, you want to basically help the firms that are affected by the particular shock in the economy, not just a wholesale blanket, bailout for everyone who may or may not have been, doing the best thing for them. I guess I'm just curious about what other things talk about. I know in a Canadian context, it has in the past, and I've argued my case. But anyways, I'm just curious whether you guys have thought about it. And as far as few notes, there's way too much text in presentations. I think they kind of read like academic journals, which is fine. So long as the content is good. But it is hard to read. I think that a lot of the information you convey can be expressed much easier, much cleaner, much easier. I guess you would be able to convey the message cleaner if you just use graphs, colors. We don't have to print this now. We don't have to worry about printing presentations. So we're doing them online, and I think you can just spend a little bit. There was one we were comparing to Germany and France, and there was just a lot of text. I was trying to strain my eyes to read it, and really it could have just been a couple of side-by-side charts. And it's great that you guys are using Fred to get data, but you can download data into Excel or Office, Linux Office suite and create charts side by side. A lot of them would have been nice to see Germany and France on the same axis, with the same coordinates, and you would have been able to index it or whatever. But just saying, it was really good content, lots of great material. It's almost overwhelming, I guess. That is a compliment and a suggestion all at once. Well done otherwise, right? Thank
you for the feedback.
I just wanted to add on the moral hazard point. It is a considered detraction of the short-time work. The fact that certain companies would have retained employees anyway, and this sort of just gives them money for nothing. Just good said.
I just had a quick question about the.
No, go for it.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I just had a quick question about the vaccine rollout that you talked about at the end of the presentation and comparing Germany and France. Is there any data whether the cost to vaccinating a person differ across those two comparisons?
While looking into the vaccine rollouts, I didn't notice anything in particular about that in terms of the different costs. The biggest thing that I noted while looking into it was just the supply chain that was going into both countries, which was likely a result of whoever was negotiating with the different pharmaceutical companies to secure a supply for their people.
Great, thanks.
Okay, awesome. So that brings us to the very end of our presentations. Thank you to the three teams for providing an extremely insightful evening. I know I've taken away something extremely tangible from this evening, and hopefully all of you have as well. We're going to have another 10 minutes for the judges to grade the presentations, and to distract the teammates from the anxiety of results, we're going to have another icebreaker for you. So Samvid, by popular demand, on to you. Yeah, take it over.
So I took Michael's suggestion and I have an economics Jeopardy pulled up. So let's rack your brains. Give me a second. I'll just share my screen. Okay, I have economics 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Shoot. Econ 2, 500. Damn. Give an example of human resource. Labor. Okay. Labor, employees. Oh, I just have dots. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. Yes,
Yeah.
For sure. There's so many. Okay, keep going.
No, but that was good. I mean, the fact that, you're aware that as a producer, or sorry, as a human being, you can choose to allocate your time to leisure or labor, and it's not, you should always consider the prices, right? So the wage rate and what you feel your internal rate of leisure should be, whereas how much you would pay for the extra hour of rest per day. I mean, some of these things I think should be discussed and considered. It would cause better choices amongst people. Anyway, I'm not jumping in anymore. That's it.
Yeah, definitely. And for the ones we don't have answers on Jeopardy, we have 6 amazing judges who can tell us whether we are right or wrong. So Samrit, on to the next one. Okay, Econ 3 500.
Give an example of a producer.
Yeah, firms, factories, Uber, dairy farmers, yeah.
Nice.
I think it's important to just mention that, these are all businesses, but there's also not-for-profit businesses, there's charities, there's government, there's NGOs. There are a lot of producers that are not just your standard ones that are part of the economy, including the housewives and house husbands that vacuum and do whatever, raise children. Right? These are all economic activities that are that should be valued and should be considered. So that's it.
Any next takers? Count 500. Give an example of a human resource.
Oh, I think this is rapid.
Is it repeated? Okay, my bad. I'll go with Econ 1 500. What is money?
Okay, come on. Everyone should know this. We have professors, we have professionals, professors who probably taught you. To some of you, either me or Hamad have been a TA, so come on. Yes, yes. Okay, we have a couple of good answers on the chat.
This is the answer they give, but yep. All of you have also given some correct answers, so good job. I think we're still 100% in econ.
The more important one is the medium of exchange, as well as the vehicle of investment. I mean, but the medium of exchange, money really is, the object of money is to make, to prevent bartering, to make bartering more efficient. So whatever I produce, I don't have to switch it for potatoes or whatever. I can sell it and then purchase potatoes with that money. You know what I mean? Like that actually creates the efficiency. And that's the concept to take away from.
I believe Professor Angelo actually specializes in the central bank, if I'm not mistaken. If maybe Professor Angelo has something to say about that.
I agree with Michael. It's a medium of exchange.
Right.
There are other things, but it's a medium of exchange. That makes it money.
First and foremost, but I mean, it's important to consider now with Bitcoin playing a larger and larger part. And, I'm sure there's going to be other blockchains. I mean, there are thousands of different blockchains. You can write your own code to create a currency. So technically, governments now should really be starting to focus on what the implications of this is, because if you're using Bitcoin and not participating in the in the Canadian dollar economy, so to speak, I think there's implications to be like there's important implications to take away for policy.
Yeah, picking off that, just because we started an interesting topic, and I see most of the judges have already put their responses in, we can actually switch to the Q&A part of this event and actually have a question for Professor Angelo, picking up on Bitcoin and all these cryptocurrencies that are coming up. What do you think, Professor, would that mean for banks?
Well, Bitcoin means nothing for banks. It's right now just a very idiosyncratic speculative asset. It could be used for payments, but it's way too expensive to be used for payments. Years ago, I think somebody bought a pizza with one. Now it would probably cost you about, I don't know, $55 to $60 in fees to buy a pizza. So it's not a medium exchange. It's not used as a medium exchange. But there may be other central bank digital currencies coming out in the future. We're going to see different ways of making payments, and I don't think Bitcoin has got any role to play at all in making payments. It may have a role to play as a store of value, the way people have held gold for many, many years. I have no idea why people value gold, but they do, and they have, and they probably will. If everyone decides that Bitcoin is a good store of value, fine, they could use that. But I don't see, you don't buy anything. You don't buy a cup of coffee with gold coins. You won't use Bitcoin to buy things.
You could.
Oh, bullshit! Go to your second cup. Go to your second cup and give them a gold coin.
I will do that.
And ask for change.
You know what? You think if I give them a silver dollar, they're not going to take it? As a corporation, maybe that's not a policy. You think there's not going to be an employee there that will push it?
If you go to the second cup with a bar of gold, they will not give you change. I'm very confident of this.
No, but I'll buy the whole cup. I'll buy the whole store. I don't need it. If I have a gold coin, I don't need it.
People trade cars for bicycles. You can barter all you want, but don't tell me it's a medium of exchange. There's no one knows. No, the prices are not quoted, and you just can't do it.
Oh my God! I think I don't think you understand the concept of blockchain and these currencies, because they actually offer precisely, and they actually offer the answer to the question that has been plaguing Western economies and Japanese economy forever. How do you get negative interest rates? How do you envision it? The Bank of England was doing some good experiments on actual bills that were electronically imprinted that would decrease in value.
We can have digital monies. I'm saying that Bitcoin is not going to be a digital money.
I think blockchain. There's a difference between blockchain and Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the invention of, it was used for illicit purposes, just like regular cash is. Everything is, all the $100 bills are laced with coke in the U.S. You know what I mean? This is just the reality of it. And blockchain as a technology is great. Bitcoin itself
we know that what is it called? Proof by work is very, very expensive. So the technology that underlies Bitcoin's ability to make sure that the transactions are recorded correctly and all that kind of stuff is a very, very expensive technology.
Yeah, because it's flawed, because it keeps everything, but we don't need to keep everything.
No, that's right. But currently, that's what they're using. And
I'll write.
And the electricity consumption of Bitcoin is currently something like all of the electricity consumed in the province of Ontario.
You can put it up in the Northwest Territories in winter and have the servers running there and actually heat homes while they're generating Bitcoin.
You still have to get electricity to them. I've often wondered why Newfoundland doesn't have more Bitcoin farming. But apparently electricity is very expensive in Newfoundland, even though it's cold. So Quebec has a lot of Bitcoin farming.
Electricity is expensive in Newfoundland because they messed up on a project. There was that big project that they were taking hydro from one place to another.
Churchill Falls.
It went over budget by how many times over? That's why it's expensive, I think. But anyway, listen, another.
This seems like a very exciting debate, but I do believe
there's nothing exciting about it. So it's a completely crazy asset. It's a completely crazy asset. I mean, we all love these kinds of things. People will be writing books about it. People will be wondering 100 years from now, what the heck happened? I'm sure of that. This technology of the blockchain, it probably has some purposes. Quite frankly, I haven't really seen any really useful purposes. The idea is that we sort of can agree on what's going on without having a trusted intermediary. But taking trust out of the system is pretty expensive. I could see using it in things like voting, just to make sure that your vote was counted correctly, and you could verify that your vote was counted, but other people couldn't tell how you voted. I think that's actually one of the best applications.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that point of view. I have a similar view. Now, grounding it back to today's event, I actually want to go through each one of the judges and just ask them. So you've graded not only the top 3 presentations right now, but also the presentations that we sent before for the other teams. So is there any particular trend that you noticed throughout the presentations, or is there any advice that you would like to give in terms of economic research or just presenting or organizing? So maybe we start with Shirin.
Thank you so much. I think one of the challenges when trying to explain economic concepts is that we can start using a lot of fancy words that then when you put it all together, it sounds really great, but the content is probably not there. So sometimes when trying to explain these things, the simpler you go, the better. So if I'm trying to explain what GDP is, sure, I can go and start talking about the different components of GDP and bringing out the formula and whatnot. But if I imagine that I'm trying to explain this to someone that doesn't know anything about economics, right? And I'm like, hey, grandpa, hey, grandma, let me tell you about what is GDP, right? And I try to do this exercise with them and be like, oh, so I think GDP is everything that is produced within a country and so on and so forth. Then these types of explanations helps us have more clarity about what we're talking about, right? So it also becomes easier for others to understand what we're saying and for others to build on our idea. So yeah, I think you guys did a great job doing this and just encouraging you to keep doing it.
Okay, that's actually a really good advice and something I know that I'll use in my presentations as well. Tony, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I completely agree with what Shireen already said. What I would add is that just kind of like on presentation in general, when it comes to econ or otherwise, kind of a good exercise to keep in mind when you're composing a presentation and presenting it is that you're presenting a storyline, right? So you're telling a story and you want that story to be coherent and straightforward. In many cases, those presentations that you would be giving later on in life, you'll be giving them to people who are extremely busy and don't have time to go into the details anyway. And so what you want to have some key messages that pop out that are clear and some, very, relevant and very clear visualization of data if you want to use data. Like a practice that we typically do at the World Bank is whenever we're writing reports or whatnot, there can be 100-page reports, but each paragraph starts with a sentence that is in bold. And so whenever someone is skimming through that report, they can just read the first sentence of each paragraph and understand what's happening. And so this is what you need to think of when you're creating a presentation. What are the main messages that I want to have? And what is the story that I'm trying to tell?
Yeah, I think this is something that all judges have mentioned, and I've also looked at some of the comments that they've put in the grading, is that there's a lot of text on the slides and that they prefer that students actually said all the information and proved it through different metrics that they put on the slide. So that's great advice. Hamad, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I want to build on what Tony mentioned. I think I've been to these competitions in past years as well. And a common trend I've noticed is that students will often use graphs taken from different sources. And to tell a better story, they could do their own very simple analysis to put that data together and convey a message. So for example, there were a lot of discussion today where we're comparing 2 different countries and we have an unemployment rate from country 1 and unemployment rate from country 2. Now you could have just got that data, exported to Excel or some other programming language you learned in a course, and you could have stacked them on top of each other, draw a vertical line for when COVID happened, and you could tell a story for how you can compare the indicators of these 2 countries before and after COVID. So today I really like the use of economic concepts that you would learn in a macro course like Ronald's macro course, but I would have liked to see more of students doing some of their own analysis with this publicly available data on economic indicators and COVID cases.
Thank you for that, Hamad. Yeah, I think it was Tony who also mentioned it, that, you know, use Excel and clean the data that you get from all these different resources that fit what you're trying to say. So work on the data that you extract from all these websites. I think that's great advice. Professor Angelo, would you like to go next?
I think I'm just going to pile on. There was a big difference between the first round and this final round. In the first round, we didn't get to see you present. So all the information we had was what was on the slides. And I appreciated the detail. It was like reading a paper. Whereas when you present, you don't have to have all that detail on your slides. You can emphasize more visual aspects of what you're doing. And the fact that you get to use your voice and your body to communicate means that you don't have to put as much information on the slides. And I think that's, you know, so it's the way that the contest was set up, but we didn't get to see you in the first round. So I really appreciated the detail in the first round, but in the second round, that actually detracts, I think, from the presentation.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So definitely tailor it to the audience and how it's going to be used. Michael, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. I certainly would second what Professor Molino has said. I've gotten a lot better. Having said that, it's still, I mean, I'm sorry if I'm wrong about this, but so I still have yet to see much more than assertions as far as you know, and I understand it.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Michael. Your audio is a bit fuzzy. We can't hear you properly.
Is it better?
Yes, it's better now. Thank you.
So no, what I was trying to say is, you know, me being the quantitative guy, I will stress the importance of, you know, I think someone mentioned that it's good to use data. I don't think it's good to use data. I think it's essential to use data. And, you know, especially now in the world where there's so much of it, I mean, you can create data from anything. If you learn Python, that's, you know, as an economist, I don't take economics. I did computer science. You don't have to do that if you want to, but you can, anything else, it would go a long way to making the presentation actually potentially publishable. Like if you actually took quantitative data and use whatever software package you use. I don't know, what is it that you guys use, like MATLAB or R or data, or do you use anything? It's the one that, what is the course used?
I think we actually use data in R, but a lot of our students are first and second year, so I'm not sure how much proficiency they have in these softwares.
Oh, you should create courses in high school, because I was writing BASIC when I was 6 years old. So it's like you don't need to be 20 to write code. You can write it at very young age. And I think it's just, anyway, I'm going to stop because everybody's spoken way too much. I think these are great presentations. You guys have done an excellent job given the, you know, the level that it's at. I think most of you, if not all, have great people ahead of you as economists or as whatever else you choose. But I would just leave you with that. You know, data is important, and if you can use it to make better policy and, you know, and make people happier, and if you could do good with it, then I think, I mean, that's why I do economics. Economics, it basically covers everything. So you know, the world is your oyster, and I think that in itself should, I hope that it motivates you a little bit to do work in this field. It is a very rewarding profession, not as dismal as some people would say. Again, my main critique is really just the lack of quantitative analysis, and often the assertions that were not grounded in data or in evidence. I was not convinced about a lot of stuff to do with that. But again, really good stuff. Not one. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Professor Ronald, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I had a hard time hearing what Michael said. So at the risk that I say something very similar, let me also, one thing that stood out to me is that, first of all teams did a great job. I was really impressed by how, how well the presentations were, how much information they contained and how they were put together in a relatively short period of time. One thing that I saw in one presentation that I would have liked to see a little bit more is not just the standard data that we tend to look at as economists, as macroeconomists, GDP, unemployment rate, but there's so much more data out there in the world, and like, be creative, right? Like economists are very expensive when it comes to, so there's lots of mobility data, for example, that's available in quite a bit of, in shocking detail, right? So if you have if you walk around with your cell phone, anytime you go somewhere, where you go ends up in some database, and that data at a more aggregate level is available. And so you can see exactly how much more people stayed at home after and so using that as an alternative economic indicator, right? Like
and I think Google actually makes that data available for research.
Yeah, exactly. And there is I forgot the name now, but there is another company too that also has that.
There is Deloitte. As a Deloitte employee, I know we spoke about it. And there's a number of aggregators, and I think economists would be wise to use them.
Right. No, it would have been very interesting to see the differences between the countries in terms of, right? Like, did mobility drop more in France than in Germany, or is the other way around? I have no idea, but I think it would have been interesting to see that.
Definitely. I think that's great advice too. It also adds something to your presentation instead of just looking at the normal indicators that we usually look at. Yeah, I think that's great. So we're going to get to announcing the top three, actually the first, second, and third team soon. But for now, I want to open it up to our students, all the students who are attending, whether it's the teams who have presented or students who've just come to sit in and listen. If you have any questions for our judges, feel free to either raise your hand or put them in the chat. Don't be shy. If anyone has a question, raise your hands and we can take them up.
Won't bite, I promise.
Hey, I had a question for, I don't remember who it was that asked us. We were the third group. I had a question about the unemployment, like the different kinds of unemployment that you were talking about. So I may just not have like enough information about the literature, but from what I've seen, the distinction between types of unemployment seems a bit not well defined. I was wondering what you were specifically looking for when you asked us about that, and also if you could, like, maybe provide us with a definition or like some better distinctions about the different kinds of unemployment.
I believe it was Tony who asked that question, so I'm going to refer you to him.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I'm gonna, try to answer it, but from what I understand, also Ronald is a professor in labor economics, so he might compliment me further if he needs to. So the idea behind me asking this question is that there is actually a definition for different types of unemployment, right? So frictional unemployment being the unemployment that naturally happens between when someone leaves a job and is looking for another job, and that is something that the state doesn't really intervene in, like trying to mitigate, because it's a natural kind of phenomenon in economies. There's structural unemployment, which is usually caused by some sort of either external or internal factor happening to the economy. And the idea, so that I was kind of aiming for from that group is that we're focusing, when it comes to COVID, we want to look more at structural unemployment. So it was just kind of to tease out whether the understanding between those two differences is there. The second idea was about the natural changes in unemployment that happen throughout the year in certain economies, right? So, or over like different periods of time. So the economy like is not always in a similar trend. So it's kind of like a wave, right? So how do we identify that the changes in unemployment that we see currently are not caused by this kind of typical change that we would see anyway, and are specifically caused by the COVID pandemic? And this is what I was trying to tease out from you guys, is that what would you do to account for these other economic factors that might be contributing to unemployment? I don't know if that helps clarify things.
That does help a lot. I guess it would be difficult to sort of, in terms of specifically frictional unemployment, it would be difficult to measure, right? I guess one interesting thing that we could look at would be new grad unemployment and compare that to previous years and things like that. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about how you would measure the differences between these unemployments, other than, you know, if it's seasonal, just plot like an average of the seasonal graph for the last 10 years and see if there's differences? Other than that, do you have any ideas or any thoughts that you were thinking about?
My idea is not for you to measure, it's just to find the data for it. So typically the country should have the data. If we're talking about the UK, they should have the data on frictional unemployment available. So yeah, like measuring it, definitely don't expect it from a team of undergrad students in their first year. But finding the data, and even that, I wasn't expecting it. Like I wasn't expecting for you to present the different elements. I was just trying to tease out like how deep your understanding is of unemployment, because that specific presentation did focus a lot on unemployment. So that was the reason why I wanted to kind of push a bit further on this.
Right, cool. Thank you so much.
I think it's also important to distinguish between employment and unemployment, because we have not in the labor force. So some people lose their jobs and they don't bother looking for jobs. And so they don't show up as being unemployed, but that can be a big deal. And then also in the labor market, we look at things like people who are working part-time who would like to be working full-time. That also tends to change. In this last COVID crisis, we had a lot of people who had jobs, but they were getting paid, but they were not working. So we had some very bizarre things going on in our labor market as well. So they would be counted as employed, but they were actually working 0 hours for, you know, as some sort of statistical quirk.
Right. And
thank you so
I would
much.
add to that, like when comparing, for example, the UK and Brazil, like one difference is the size of the informal economy, right? Which is another reason why just looking at the unemployment rate might just miss certain things that are important.
And you guys just want a quick understanding of what the differences between the U.S. The BLS produces. They have a good resource on their website. U3 is the unemployment rate that the BLS usually produces every month, but U6, there's basically everything from U1 to U6, and there's pretty good descriptors there. So for anybody who wants to do labor economics or is just interested in that stuff, there's resources all around you. And the BLS is pretty good, and it's free.
Thank you for that. I'm sure some of the students will go back and look that up. I see Devro has raised his hand. Devro, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you guys so much for being judges for this case competition, for coming out and answering our questions. So I know Professor Molino and Professor Woltroff, you kind of alluded to this before, but COVID-19 has definitely thrown a wrench into gears of the global economy and has definitely highlighted a lot of quirks and highlighted different trends. Like for example, last year, around this time, right, the price of oil futures dropped into the negatives. So the question that I have for you all is, how do you think COVID has changed economic academia and the way that we actually view economic problems? And how do you think this will affect the field in the future?
First of all, I just want to debunk one thing. Oil prices did not drop to negative. The price of a particular contract, which took
the futures
dropped, right? So not oil, right? It was a quirk. So I don't want people to start thinking that oil is negative. You know what I mean? So, and this is the kind of stuff that media loves to pick up on, and they'll run an article saying that, you know, an economist says that oil is negative. So, you know, anyway, just take note of the fact that everything you say, at this point at least, online is going to be recorded and will haunt you for the rest of your life. The other questions, I think I'm just going to let the professors talk because I'm not a professor.
Yeah, so your question was about like how economic research has changed, do you think? Or
like research or like the theory that we typically apply, like how do you think all that will change? Or do you think we should consider more exogenous events or more like crises, public health, for example, into economic models, macro or micro, or for example?
Right, so I mean, last year you saw a lot of economists starting to work on COVID, right? Like epidemiological models, trying to right. I think, I mean, this is not necessarily backed up by any data, but my impression is it has gotten less a little bit in the last few months. It seemed like it was a big hype, you know, like last spring when we were in the first lockdown and you know, everyone wanted to write a COVID paper. I've seen a little bit less of it, so it's not clear to me that this is going to be a lasting effect. Maybe we go back to the usual things we study and the usual models we write down. But for sure there was a big peak in this kind of thing.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I mean, for me, I haven't been working a few months because I'm on disability now, but I started writing a paper about just when lockdowns happened and the you know, basically was a relationship between how quickly countries responded and locked down their economies to, you know, how to economic performance effectively, or to, you know, how deep the trough would be. But haven't completed. I don't know if there's work on it. But one thing that for sure, you know, will change for economists is, I mean, graphing is going to be a whole lot more difficult because the scale is going to be always crazy now. When you start doing GDPs, it's going to, you know, drown out everything else. So we're going to figure out a way to deal with that. But besides that, things like, you know, the commercial real estate market, for instance, you know, and even the residential, it's like there's going to be structural breaks in the economy that will need to be, you know, identified and documented. And, you know, hopefully we'll be able to figure out a way to, you know, to isolate them and you know, continue the research so that we have a data set that's long enough. But you know, I think that's my main concern as far as an economist. I do like the working from home aspect. That I benefit from. But yeah, I think that, you know, just that's what's on my mind anyway. The structure, the fact that things have changed, probably are not going to go back to the way that things were before. I don't think, but they never really will.
You know, Ronald mentioned that last year economists were writing a lot of COVID papers. For the most part, economists were taking on the epidemiologists who would say if this many people are in a population and they bump into each other randomly, how many people are going to get infected? And there was an older literature having to do with HIV/AIDS that also was predicting the path of the AIDS epidemic. And economists sort of said, well, it also, you know, depends upon people's choices. I mean, it's if it's risky, people will, you know, people like sex, but if it's risky, they'll engage in less of it, or they'll do more protected sex. And, you know, the early stage of the debate with the epidemiologists was, you know, we're not mechanical. If there are a lot of risks out there, you expect people to take that into account and to reorganize their affairs. We lost the battle in terms of getting epidemiologists to think about endogenous responses to the AIDS epidemic. We lost the battle here as well. I mean, I don't think they're paying any attention to the notion that the people worry about themselves. I do think that this COVID crisis is going to affect some, not macroeconomics so much, but urban economics is going to be affected by it, because the benefits of being in a city seem like they've changed. I mean, they haven't all gone away. So, you know, we like being in a city because we like restaurants, we like theaters, we like bars. But you can see what's happened to real estate values in downtown Toronto. I mean, you know, if you're not walking to work and you're not able to take advantage of the lifestyle of downtown Toronto, why be in a 500 square foot studio condominium? So you know, I think urban economics is one of the fields for which this is going to be a very interesting experiment, because it's kind of like the first big negative shock to the benefits of urbanization that they've seen in a very long time. I mean, there's been this long trend where we keep trying to figure out, why does everybody want to live in Toronto given how expensive it is? Well, there must be huge externalities to being in the city, either in consumption or in production. You know, New York, Hong Kong, all these places that are very, very dense. Now that we've had COVID and people have invested in this technology like the one that we're having here, where you don't have to be physically as present to take advantage of interactions. Well, that'll change. I think the dynamics of what are optimal city sizes and optimal city densities, I think will be very interesting for, you know, does it make sense to run all these, to invest in all these subways that we're talking about building in Toronto if people aren't going to be going down to the downtown core on a regular basis, or fewer of them are going to be doing it? So there are going to be some interesting questions, I think, but not so much in macro, but I think in urban economics will be very interesting.
I second that. I just wanted to say, I think, Professor, you should start a course at UC maybe, you know, I think there's a lot of good data on geographical data, and with the technology now we can, you know, we can map and like we can answer a lot more pertinent questions at a local level, I think, now that we ever were before. So I think it's a good time for it now.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have one question in the chat, and I think Professor Angelo actually answered that while addressing another question. Now, we do want to be conscious of the time of the students, of the professors, and the professionals. And I know that all the teams are waiting eagerly to know their results. So I'm going to hand it over to Samvid to let us know who are the first, second, and third positions.
Thank you, judges. Thank you, participants.
We normally have a drum roll here, but unfortunately it's virtual. So
just download it from Google. But if you just start from the third goal, just make sure, because you don't want to say the first one. But yeah,
I got you. Just before that, to convey our appreciation to the attendees, we've organized 3 gift cards, and we'll post that on our Instagram after the event, hopefully later tonight or tomorrow. So do check out. But yeah, for the top 3 positions. So now that the judges have graded the presentations, scores have been tallied. And so I'll just make sure that I don't make any mistake. Okay,
and
so
just to add to what Samvid is saying, so we have a good breakdown of all the scores, which we will send to each of the teams separately after the event with the judges' comments as well. Right now, we're only going to announce the positions.
Yep. And in addition to that, the prizes and stuff, all that logistics will be emailed to you in the upcoming few days. So 3rd place, drum roll, please. We have Team 9. Congratulations, Team 9, you're 3rd place. Virtual party celebrations for you.
Yeah, I could do the drum roll.
Yeah, I see all the clap reactions in chat. So this is great. Congratulations, team.
Awesome. So more drum rolls. I'll go to 1st place now. So drum roll for 1st place, UC case competition.
1st or 2nd?
I'll go 1st. Yeah. Well, we have to celebrate the 1st.
You can start. You don't want to do that because then the 2nd place person does so bad. But just start a 2nd. Let them have, you know. Anyway, that's my thought.
Let's go 2nd place then. So 2nd place, drum roll, please. We have Team 10 in 2nd place. And automatically that leads to Team 3 for 1st place. Congratulations, everyone.
The winners don't need that much.
Congratulations.
Well done. Really good work. Thank you. And seeing is top notch.
I also want to congratulate all the participants. Well done.
Okay, so that does conclude our UC annual case competition, Race to Recovery Challenge. Congratulations to all the winners and all the participants. We hope you had as fulfilling as a time participating as we had organizing this competition for you. And we hope to see you again soon. To our judges, thank you so much again for taking the time out of what we're sure is a busy schedule to make it to UEC's most coveted event of the year. We truly appreciate it, and we hope we have the honor of hosting you again in the events to come. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the comments were incredibly insightful, I believe, not only to just the participants, but to us who are organizing this as well. Just to hear different views on how to improve our presentations and our thought process as well. So thank you so much for taking out the time and coming.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you, everyone.
Have
a great
well
weekend.
done.